Mark had always been a pillar of strength and reliability. At 58, he had weathered life's storms with a quiet resilience that his daughter, Emma, deeply admired. Since the passing of his wife, Linda, a decade earlier, Mark had dedicated himself to being both father and mother to Emma. Their bond was unbreakable, forged through years of shared grief, laughter, and mutual support. Emma, now 25, had recently embarked on an exciting new chapter of her life. After years of rigorous study, she had secured a promising position at a prestigious architectural firm in Copenhagen. The opportunity was everything she had dreamed of, and Mark couldn't have been prouder. Yet, as he watched her flourish from afar, he couldn't shake the gnawing sensation that time was slipping through his fingers. A few months prior, during a routine checkup, Mark had received news that would alter the course of his life: a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, with doctors estimating he had less than a year to live. The weight of this revelation pressed heavily on him, but he made a conscious decision to keep it to himself. He reasoned that Emma was just beginning to spread her wings, and burdening her with his illness would only clip them. Mark's days became a delicate dance of concealment. He maintained his usual routines, rising early to tend to the garden, meeting friends for coffee, and volunteering at the local community center. To the outside world, he appeared as robust as ever. However, behind closed doors, the reality was starkly different. The disease was relentless, sapping his strength and leaving him in constant pain. Phone calls with Emma became exercises in deception. He would muster his most cheerful voice, regaling her with tales of neighborhood happenings and asking detailed questions about her projects. When she inquired about his health, he would brush off any concerns with a chuckle, attributing any fatigue to just getting older. Emma, preoccupied with the demands of her new job and trusting her father's words, accepted his explanations without suspicion. During her occasional visits home, Mark took great pains to mask his deteriorating condition. He would rest extensively before her arrival, ensuring he had the energy to appear lively and engaged. Meals were prepared in advance to avoid showcasing his diminished appetite, and painkillers were strategically timed to coincide with their activities. Emma noticed subtle changes. He seemed thinner, perhaps a bit more tired, but attributed it to the natural aging process and the emotional toll of living alone. Mark's decision to remain silent was rooted in love and protection. He recalled the anguish they both endured during Linda's illness and eventual passing. The endless hospital visits, the emotional roller coaster, the helplessness, it had left scars that had barely healed. He couldn't bear the thought of subjecting Emma to that ordeal once more, especially now, when she was poised to build a bright future. Yet, beneath his resolve lay a current of fear and denial. Confronting his mortality was a daunting prospect. Discussing end-of-life matters felt like conceding defeat, and Mark wasn't ready to surrender. He clung to the hope that he might be an exception, that perhaps the doctors were mistaken, or that a miracle cure was on the horizon. This hope, however tenuous, became his refuge. As weeks turned into months, the strain of his secret began to manifest. Managing his affairs became increasingly challenging. Bills piled up as he struggled to keep track of finances, and important documents lay unorganized. The house, once meticulously maintained, showed signs of neglect. Simple tasks became Herculean efforts, and the isolation of his condition weighed heavily on his spirit. Friends and neighbors sensed something was amiss. Mark's once active social life dwindled. He declined invitations and was seldom seen at community events. When confronted, he would offer vague excuses about being busy or not feeling up to it. Respecting his privacy, they refrained from pressing further, though concern lingered in their hearts. Emma remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. She continued to share her triumphs and challenges with her father, finding solace in his unwavering support. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, seemed bridged by their regular conversations. She had no inkling that each call was a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to shield her from a painful truth. Mark's health continued to decline, and the facade became harder to maintain. There were moments when he nearly broke his silence, times when the pain was unbearable or when loneliness became too profound. He would pick up the phone, Emma's number dialed, only to hang up before the call connected. The words were there, perched on the tip of his tongue, but fear held them back. He often reflected on the importance of preparation. Friends had spoken about organizing their affairs, drafting wills, and discussing final wishes with loved ones. Mark had always intended to do the same, but found reasons to postpone. There was always tomorrow, he thought, until the tomorrows began to run out. One evening, as he sifted through old photo albums, memories of Linda flooded back. He recalled the promises they made to each other, to always be open, to face challenges together, to prioritize their family's well-being. Guilt gnawed at him. He knew he was breaking those vows by keeping Emma in the dark. Yet, the protective father in him rationalized that this was different, that shielding her was an act of love. Sleep became elusive. Nights were spent wrestling with his conscience, debating whether to reveal his condition. He envisioned various scenarios. Emma rushing home, abandoning her career to care for him, her being angry and hurt by his secrecy, or her being devastated by the impending loss. Each possibility reinforced his decision to remain silent, to bear the burden alone. Mark's world grew smaller. The walls of his home, once filled with warmth and laughter, now echoed with solitude. The television became his companion, though he rarely registered the content. Books lay unopened, hobbies neglected. Life was slipping away, not just because of the cancer, but because of the isolation he imposed upon himself. He occasionally ventured out for short walks, leaning heavily on a cane he had reluctantly acquired. The fresh air provided momentary relief, but the effort left him exhausted. Neighbors would wave from a distance, their expressions a mix of friendliness and concern. Mark would muster a smile, a nod, and continue on, each step a testament to his determination to maintain normalcy. As his body weakened, so did his resolve. The idea of facing the end alone, without the comfort of his daughter's presence, became increasingly unbearable. He began drafting letters to Emma, attempting to explain his choices, to convey his love, and to offer guidance for the future. Yet, each letter felt inadequate, failing to encapsulate the depth of his emotions and the complexity of his decisions. The days blurred together, a monotonous cycle of pain management and introspection. Mark's world had become a waiting room, anticipating an end he wasn't prepared to meet. The weight of unspoken words, of plans unmade, and of time wasted pressed heavily upon him. In his quest to protect Emma, Mark had inadvertently built a wall between them. A wall constructed of good intentions, but fortified by fear and denial. As he sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the ticking clock a constant reminder of passing time, he couldn't help but wonder if his silence had truly been the right choice. It was a Thursday morning when Emma's world shifted beneath her feet. She was in the middle of preparing for a client presentation, slides open on her laptop, coffee cooling beside her, when her phone rang. It was a local number from her hometown, one she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but a sudden instinct told her to pick up. "Hello," she answered, distractedly glancing at the screen. "Is this Emma Walker?" A woman's voice asked, professional but tense. "Yes, speaking. This is Dr. Carver from St. Joseph's Medical Center in Brookfield. I'm afraid your father, Mark Walker, was brought in early this morning by ambulance. He collapsed at home. He's in stable but critical condition at the moment. Are you able to come in?" Emma froze, the air pulled from her lungs. "What? Wait, my dad? No, there must be a mistake. He was fine. We just talked a few days ago." Her voice cracked, and her hands began to shake. "What happened?" Dr. Carver paused, then said gently, "Emma, I think it's best we talk when you get here. Is there someone who can bring you? Or do you need help arranging transportation?" "I'm in Copenhagen," Emma said, her mind scrambling to process the words. "I live in Denmark. I'll book a flight. Please keep him stable until I get there." "We'll do everything we can," the doctor said, before ending the call. Emma sat motionless for a long moment, the phone still pressed to her ear after the line had gone dead. Her breathing grew shallow. The sound of her pulse drowned out the hum of the office around her. She pushed back from her desk, stood, and told her supervisor in a daze that she had to leave. There was no time for explanations. Within the hour, she was in a cab, on the phone with the airline, trying to get the soonest flight to the U.S. The journey was a blur. 10 hours of stillness and turbulence, a tight connection in New York, a rental car from the airport to Brookfield. She arrived at the hospital after midnight, exhausted, wired, heart pounding with every step through the fluorescent-lit corridors. At the ICU entrance, a nurse met her with soft eyes and a clipboard. "Emma Walker?" the nurse asked. Emma nodded. "He's resting now. You can see him, but I need to prepare you. He's weak. He may not be fully conscious." The door to the room creaked open, and there he was. Her father, pale, small in the bed, with tubes in his arms and machines monitoring every breath. He looked older than she remembered, frail, sunken, distant from the man she last hugged goodbye 6 months ago. She stepped inside, her heart breaking with every footstep. "Dad?" she whispered, pulling a chair close. "I'm here." His eyes fluttered open. Recognition passed over his face, and a weak smile tugged at his lips. "Hey, Em," he murmured, voice hoarse. "What happened?" she asked, tears threatening to fall. "Why didn't you tell me?" But Mark closed his eyes again. The exhaustion took him. The only response was the steady beeping of the monitor beside him. The next morning, Dr. Carver sat down with Emma in a small consultation room. The walls were painted a pale, sterile blue, and the coffee on the table had long gone cold. "Emma," she began, her tone measured, "your father has been battling pancreatic cancer for nearly a year. He was diagnosed last May." Emma blinked. "No, that can't be right. He would have told me." "I understand this is a shock," the doctor said gently. "But from what we can tell, he didn't inform anyone. There's no record of family involvement, no advance directive, no power of attorney. He's been doing this alone." Emma felt the air leave her body. "But I talked to him every week. I visited him in October. He didn't say a word." "I know it's difficult," Dr. Carver said. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than we'd like. Patients sometimes choose not to burden their loved ones." Burden. The word struck Emma hard. Is that what he thought she would be? A burden? The days that followed were a flurry of decisions Emma was unprepared to make. Doctors needed consent for procedures. Nurses asked about resuscitation preferences. Social workers wanted to talk about finances and next of kin forms. Every answer felt like a betrayal of her father's wishes, of her own sense of stability, of the life she had just started to build. She stayed in his house during the nights. The house that had once been their family home now felt alien. There were unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, prescription bottles crowding the bathroom sink, and a thin layer of dust over everything. She opened drawers hoping to find guidance, perhaps a will, a letter, something, but there was nothing. Just the ordinary remnants of a man who had lived quietly and alone. Each evening, she returned to the hospital, sitting beside him as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he'd wake up and smile, squeezing her hand, and Emma would hold back her questions. The questions burned inside her. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide this from me? Why did you leave me to handle this alone?" But she never asked. The words died in her throat every time. One evening, as a nurse adjusted his four, Emma finally asked, did he know how bad it was? The nurse looked at her with sad eyes. Yes, he knew. He was on palliative care medication already. He was managing it at home. Emma nodded, numb. "Did anyone try to convince him to tell me?" "We asked." He was adamant. Said he didn't want to ruin your new life. Said he was proud of you. Proud. The word twisted in her chest. Proud but silent. Proud but absent. Emma found herself spiraling through emotions she couldn't name. Grief mixed with resentment. Confusion tangled with guilt. She thought about the last phone call they'd shared, when she'd talked about a stressful deadline, and he had listened so attentively, never once mentioning that he was fighting to stay alive. And now she was the one making decisions about his life. She was the one choosing between interventions or comfort care. The weight of that responsibility crushed her. She wasn't ready. How could she be ready when she hadn't even known? At one point, A hospital administrator handed her a thick stack of documents, release forms, insurance papers, consent requests. Emma flipped through them, her eyes glazing over. "I don't even know what he wanted," she muttered. "How am I supposed to do this right?" The administrator offered a sympathetic smile. "If it helps, you're not alone in that. It's hard when there's no roadmap." Emma didn't say it, but the words rang in her mind like a scream. I shouldn't have to do this alone. In the quiet hours of the night, she sat by his bedside and talked. Even when he slept, she spoke to him, told him about her fears, about how angry she was, about how lost she felt. She confessed that she was terrified of making the wrong choice, of failing him when it mattered most. And still, he said little. When he did wake, he offered small reassurances. "You're doing great, Em. You've always been strong." Strong. Another word that felt like a lie. The truth was, she didn't feel strong. She felt abandoned. Her father had spent a year preparing for the end, but never gave her a chance to prepare with him. She wondered how many nights he had lain awake, wanting to call her, and how many times he decided to stay silent instead. She wondered if he regretted it now, if he would have done it differently. The doctors told her the time was near. Emma, standing at the precipice of goodbye, realized she wasn't just mourning the future she was about to lose. She was mourning the months already gone, the conversations never had, the truths never spoken, the comfort of being able to walk this final road together. She could have helped him. She could have been there through the treatments, through the pain, through the fear. But he hadn't given her that chance. And now, she was here, alone in the space between love and loss, trying to find meaning in the silence he left behind. Emma woke up to a gray, overcast morning, the kind that seemed to reflect her mood perfectly. The room was cold, the sheets tangled around her, as she sat up and stared blankly out the window. Her father was still in the ICU, and his condition hadn't improved overnight. The doctor had been honest. His situation was critical, and despite all efforts, the prognosis hadn't changed. There was no promise of recovery, no chance for remission. Mark was slipping away, and Emma was still reeling from the shock of it all. She hadn't expected this. Despite all the signs, his weight loss, the unexplained fatigue, the gradual shift in his behavior, she hadn't truly expected it to be this serious. She had assumed he would get better. He had always been so strong. Why didn't he tell her? Why hadn't he given her a chance to prepare, to help, to be there with him? The previous days felt like a blur. The pain of watching her father struggle mixed with the overwhelming responsibility of making decisions she wasn't ready for. Each time she returned to the hospital, she was met with the same questions. Should they increase his pain medication? Should they proceed with life support measures? Did she want to authorize a transfer to hospice care? The questions felt like knives, each one twisting a little deeper, cutting into the grief that was already beginning to consume her. But there was no time to grieve yet. Not yet. There were forms to sign, phone calls to make, and decisions to be made. She had no choice but to push her emotions aside and forge ahead. She had to do this for him. Sitting in the sterile consultation room, waiting for the doctor, Emma found herself again flipping through the stack of documents they had given her the previous day. Her eyes skimmed the papers, but she could barely focus on the words. The weight of the responsibility was suffocating. There was no will, no medical directive, no instructions about his funeral preferences or any of the other things most people thought about ahead of time. She didn't know if he wanted to be buried in the family plot or cremated. She didn't know if he had any specific wishes for his memorial service. She didn't know if he wanted a big gathering, a small one, or none at all. He had never talked about any of this. Not once. Emma found herself paralyzed by a wave of guilt. She had called him regularly, of course, but their conversations were always surface level. He had never shared his fears with her. He had never opened up about the pain he was hiding. And now, with every passing hour, she was beginning to realize just how much he had kept from her, how much he had carried on his own, in silence, without ever asking for help. It was all unraveling so quickly. She could barely hold on to the threads of the life they had once shared. The family home, once a sanctuary of comfort and love, now felt like a mausoleum. She had stayed there last night, trying to sleep in the room that had once been hers. The silence was oppressive. The memories flooded her. The sound of her mother's laughter, the way her father's voice had sounded when he told her stories before bed, the smell of her mother's cooking drifting through the house on Sunday afternoons. It felt like she had lost so much more than just him. She had lost the past, the comfort of knowing he was there, and now she was losing the future they might have shared together. There were moments when Emma felt like she was drowning in it all. The endless paperwork, the conversations with doctors that seemed to go in circles, the need to be strong when all she wanted was to curl up and cry. And then there were the others, friends and family who had reached out with their condolences, their well-meaning advice, but none of them really understood. None of them had lived this. None of them knew what it was like to find out this way. They hadn't watched their loved one quietly disintegrate behind a veil of secrecy, never having the chance to say goodbye. At the same time, Emma couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of anger. Anger that her father hadn't trusted her enough to let her in. Anger that he had made all these decisions without her, as if he had believed she wouldn't be able to handle it, as if she wasn't strong enough to bear the burden with him. Did he really think she wouldn't want to be there for him? That she wouldn't have sacrificed everything for him, the way he had done for her all those years? Her chest tightened, and she felt her breath catch as the anger surged inside her. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shake him, to demand that he explain himself, that he tell her why. But of course he couldn't. He was in a hospital bed, barely conscious, barely able to communicate. There was no one left to answer her questions. She was alone with them, alone with the mess that was now her life. Emma had always thought she would be prepared for this. It wasn't that she had expected her father to live forever, but she had always assumed there would be time. Time to talk about the difficult things. Time to figure out what she needed to know. She had always assumed they would have a conversation about his wishes, about his legacy, about the things that mattered most to him. But they had never had that conversation. It was too late for that now. By the end of the week, Mark's condition had worsened. The doctors said his body was shutting down. His kidneys were failing. The infection had spread. The decision to transfer him to hospice care had been made, though Emma still had trouble wrapping her mind around it. Hospice was a word she had always associated with the end, the final stage, the last stop before the inevitable. But she had no choice. There was nothing more the doctors could do. The most they could offer him now was comfort. As the days passed, Emma found herself grappling with a deep sense of guilt. She hadn't been there for him when he needed her. She hadn't been able to protect him or to be strong for him in the way he had always been strong for her. She felt a deep sense of failure. She had tried to be there in every way she could. She had arrived as quickly as she could after the call. She had spent hours at his bedside, but none of it felt like enough. None of it could undo the months of silence that had passed between them, the missed opportunities to connect. She spent the nights at the hospice center, sitting beside his bed as he drifted in and out of consciousness. The hours were long and often filled with deep, painful reflection. She thought about her childhood, the moments when her father had been her hero. She thought about the sacrifices he had made for her, the ways he had shown his love even when he couldn't express it in words. It was so hard for him to talk about his emotions, to share his fears. She knew that now. He had always been the quiet type, the kind of man who internalized everything, who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders without ever letting it show. In some ways, Emma realized her father's silence had been a gift and a curse. It had been his way of protecting her, of sparing her from his own pain. But now, in these final days, she couldn't help but feel that it was a curse. She had so many unanswered questions, so many things she wished she had asked him while there was still time. And then there was the matter of his finances. As if the emotional weight of the situation wasn't enough, Emma had started to uncover the reality of her father's financial situation. The bills had been piling up, unpaid for months. She found overdue notices from credit card companies, medical bills that hadn't been touched. She had no idea what was happening with his accounts, with his assets. Had he been hiding things from her? Did he even have any savings? His life insurance policies, if they existed, had never been discussed. The thought of all the unfinished business gnawed at her, intensifying her feelings of abandonment. How could he leave her with all of this? Had he truly thought it would be easier for her to deal with it all, without any preparation, without any warning? How was she supposed to fix everything now? How was she supposed to make sense of it all? The truth was, Emma didn't know how to handle it. She was overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and now burdened with the practicalities of her father's life. She didn't know how to begin to unravel the financial mess he had left behind. There was no will, no guidance, just a heap of unfinished business, with no one to ask for help but herself. And so, Emma took one step at a time. She called a lawyer, arranged meetings with financial advisors, and started sorting through the pile of documents that seemed to multiply every time she turned around. She felt completely lost, but she did it because she had to. There was no one else to take care of it, no one else to turn to. Her father had spent so much of his life protecting her, shielding her from the harshness of the world. But now, as she watched him slip away, Emma felt more unprepared than she had ever felt in her life. She had lost her father, and now she was losing the life they had built together, piece by piece. And no matter how much she wished it, she knew there was no going back. The unraveling had begun, and she was powerless to stop it. The sound of the phone ringing was muffled by the thick silence that filled the room. Emma was sitting by her father's bedside, her fingers wrapped around the warm mug of tea that had long since lost its steam. Her eyes were fixed on the steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the only sound breaking the stillness of the hospice room. She had been here for what felt like an eternity, watching him sleep, watching him slip further and further away from her, from this world, as each day passed. There were times when the silence seemed deafening, and there were other moments when the quiet seemed to wrap around her like a thick blanket, suffocating her in its heaviness. The phone rang again, and for a moment, she considered ignoring it. She had become so accustomed to the ringing in the background of her life. Friends checking in, relatives offering condolences, lawyers calling about her father's estate, that she had started to block out the noise. But this time, something made her reach for the phone. "Hello?" She answered, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Emma, it's me." Her brother's voice came through the line, sounding distant but unmistakably familiar. "I just got off the phone with the doctor. How is he?" Emma closed her eyes, feeling the familiar knot form in her chest. "Still the same," she said, the words coming out in a long, drawn-out sigh. "He's sleeping. I don't know how much longer he has." The silence on the other end of the line was long, and Emma could hear her brother's soft breathing as if he, too, were trying to find the words. "Do you think he knows we're here?" he asked, his voice trembling with a quiet uncertainty. "I don't know," Emma replied honestly. "He wakes up sometimes, but it's like he's not really here. He's somewhere else." They had been talking in circles for days. Her brother had offered to come to Brookfield, but Emma had insisted he stay in California. He had a family, a life of his own, and she couldn't bear the thought of him seeing their father like this. Not after everything he'd missed. After all, it wasn't as if they had been close. Their father had kept so much of his life secret from them, and though they both loved him, they had never been able to bridge the emotional distance that seemed to hang between them. Emma had stayed in Brookfield because she felt she had to. She couldn't bring herself to leave. There were so many things left unsaid, so many emotions left unspoken between them. She had to be here, even though she felt like she was losing herself in the process. Every day, she had to face the reality of her father's decline, and every day, she had to confront the harsh truths that had been hidden from her for so long. She could hear her brother moving in the background, probably pacing, and she felt a pang of guilt that he wasn't here with her. But even as she felt that, she knew deep down that there was nothing he could do. He wasn't here for the long, slow days of waiting. He wasn't the one who had to sign the papers, make the choices, and face the unbearable reality of watching someone you loved fade away in front of you. She had always thought of herself as strong, but now, in this moment, she felt anything but. "You should come," her brother said softly after a long pause. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll be there soon. Okay? I'll take care of everything." The words sounded reassuring, but Emma knew they didn't change the fact that she was the one who had to face the final moments of their father's life. She was the one who had to make the decisions. She was the one who had to hold his hand as he took his last breath, no matter how much her brother wanted to help. The truth was that Emma had always been the one to bear the weight of the emotional responsibility. "I'll be okay," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I've got it under control." But even as the words left her mouth, she realized how hollow they sounded. She didn't have it under control. She hadn't had it under control for days, weeks, months. She was just doing her best to keep moving forward, one moment at a time. Later that evening, Emma found herself alone in the hospice room again. The evening had fallen, and the only light in the room came from the dim glow of the bedside lamp. Her father's chest rose and fell slowly with each shallow breath. It was almost peaceful. Too peaceful, she thought. How strange it was to feel this calm in the face of something so inevitable, so devastating. She had known for days, perhaps even weeks, that this moment was coming. And yet, when it finally arrived, it felt unreal, like something she could only watch from a distance. Her father's hand was cold in hers, but she didn't mind. She couldn't bring herself to let go. She sat there for what felt like hours, her thoughts swirling around her in a fog. The guilt, the anger, the regret, they all wrapped around her like chains, each one tighter than the last. How had they gotten here? How had they ended up in this place of silence and secrecy? Emma knew that her father had loved her. She knew that, even if he had never said the words aloud, he had shown it in the quiet moments, in the small gestures that had always meant so much more than grand declarations. But even as she clung to those memories, she couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment. She couldn't shake the feeling that he had kept her at arm's length, that he had chosen to hide so much of his life from her, and now she was paying the price for it. But as she sat there, watching him slip away, a strange sense of understanding began to form within her. She wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the way she had been. The anger had been an instinct, a defense mechanism, a way to shield herself from the crushing sadness she was beginning to feel. She hadn't been angry because of the things her father had done wrong. She had been angry because he had left her with so many questions, so many things she would never get to ask him. But in that moment, as she watched his frail form rise and fall with each shallow breath, Emma realized that the anger was no longer helpful. It wasn't serving her, and it wasn't serving her father either. He had been human, flawed, vulnerable. To let go of the anger, the guilt, and the regret. To find peace in the fact that her father had done the best he could, even if it wasn't perfect. And when she finally stood up and walked out of that room, Emma knew she was walking away a different person. A part of her would always carry the weight of the loss, but she was ready to face the future, whatever it might hold. Ready to rebuild her life, to find meaning in the fragments of the past, and to cherish the memories that have been left behind. Because in the end, that's all we have, the love we give, the love we receive, and the way we choose to carry the past forward into the future. And as Emma left the hospice, the weight of the goodbye on her shoulders, she realized that she had finally made her peace with it. He had made mistakes, but he had also done the best he could with what he had. She understood that now. Emma stood up from her chair and moved to the side of the bed. She gently stroked her father's hair, just as she had done when she was a child, when she had sought comfort in his presence. She bent down, brushing a kiss against his forehead. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. The world outside the hospice room no longer existed. It was just Emma and her father, the two of them, together in that fleeting moment, holding on to each other in the only way they could. And then, quietly, the beeping of the heart monitor began to slow. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she watched the final moments unfold in front of her. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a slow, steady fading. Her father's hand grew colder in hers, and she knew. She knew that he was slipping away, that he was letting go. She sat there for a while, not moving, just waiting, watching the stillness of his chest, the soft rise and fall that grew fainter with each passing second. Finally, the beeping stopped altogether. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she realized what had happened. He was gone. A part of her wanted to scream, to cry out in disbelief. But another part of her the part that had been prepared for this moment for so long, just accepted it. This was it, the end of an era, the final goodbye. She sat there for a long time, her father's cold hand still clutched in hers, not ready to let go. She had no idea what came next, but she knew that, for now, it was time to rest. It is time to move on, to take everything she had learned, all the pain and the love, and use it to build a future that honored her father's memory, while allowing her to embrace her own life once again.